You could call this book an Obama-era artifact. I researched and wrote it during the first 5 years of his presidency, in the midst of hope gradually fading into disappointment as the war machine grinded on. Any book is at least partially a captive of the time in which it is written, and in the case of writing U.S. history, the mystic chords of memory of the founding and first century of the U.S. conquest of the continent haunted the time, echoes of endless wars since the beginning that became the United States. As I began writing, I felt dismayed hearing President Obama's 2009 inaugural speech in which he eloquently celebrated settler colonialism and a land without people. For us, they packed up their few worldly possessions and traveled across oceans in search of a new life. For us, they toiled in sweatshops and settled the West, endured the lash of the whip and plowed the hard earth. President Obama affirmed another key element of the U.S. national myth in an interview a few days later with Al Arabiya television in Dubai. Asked if the United States could gain the trust of the Muslim world, he said, "We sometimes make mistakes. We have not been perfect. But if you look at the track record, America was not born as a colonial power. Only by erasing the existence of indigenous nations could such a claim be made." Rather than ending the war in Afghanistan, Obama ramped it up, celebrating the U.S. Special Forces' 2011 assassination of Osama bin Laden, considered by the U.S. to be the #1 terrorist in the world, responsible for the 9/11 attacks. The videotape of Obama and other officials watching the entire operation showed the joy on their faces when a voice proclaimed, "Geronimo is dead." Neither the president nor his aides apologized for the choice of the code name when asked about it. Coming from, arguably, the most liberal U.S. president ever and the first black president, Obama's reaffirmation of the country's official origin story grounded me in my task. That task was to create a new narrative that promised liberation from a false national story. The only means for doing that was through the experiences and narratives of the indigenous peoples who were targeted for elimination from the first landing of Anglo settlers on the continent in 1607. It also meant that my task had to be about war and violence, the endless wars to take and hold the continent, followed by domination of the rest of the globe, settler colonialism and imperialism based on the Christian doctrine of discovery, a papal bull of the Holy Roman Empire, issued in 1493, granting all the Western Hemisphere to the Spanish monarchy that also was inscribed in U.S. law in the 1820s. The doctrine of discovery marked the onset of the brutal colonization and looting of the non-European world for the next 5 centuries. Soon after the book was published, life imitated art when Pope Francis announced in January 2015 that he would bestow sainthood on the Spanish colonizer Junipero Serra that September, despite the 3 decades of protests conducted by descendants of the California indigenous survivors of Spanish genocide after Serra was beatified in 1988. That had been the first step to sainthood, but was so controversial that it had been set aside. In the first canonization to take place in North America, an orgy of solemn celebration of colonialism and the genocide of California indigenous peoples, President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama, cabinet members, and members of Congress attended the ceremony at the Shrine of Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C., broadcast live on most television and radio networks. This was a blatant confirmation of the continued authority of the doctrine of discovery. The Holy See, choosing to locate the sainthood ceremony in the U.S. Capitol with a governmental endorsement presence as host, confirmed as well that the United States was carrying on the imperialist Holy Roman Empire's doctrine of discovery. The present informs every page of this book. It's not just history.